Anil Kakodkar is the man who perhaps understands more about nuclear energy in India than any other person living. He's an expert on nuclear energy, its uses in India and around the world. I'm absolutely thrilled that Dr. Kakodkar has agreed to join me in this conversation on talking about nuclear energy and its uses in India at a time when the country is once again really focusing or beginning to focus on the use of such energy. Dr. Kakurkar, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Let me begin by asking you, sir. There is a lot of talk about India starting to, relook at nuclear energy as a very feasible option for its energy needs. Could you walk us through how this transition came to be? Because until recently, it seems that we were quite afraid of the use of nuclear energy.
Not really so. The nuclear energy program has been progressing right since the beginning, since the beginning of atomic energy program, or let's say India's independence. It has been a very difficult journey, primarily because India has been pursuing an autonomous approach to kind of nuclear energy for all its needs, more particularly the national development. And so the whole technology has been developed in spite of a lot of technology restrictions, embargo regime that had been operating. And then, of course, there was realization across the international community that the India is a large country with large energy needs, and growth of nuclear power in India is in fact important. And now with the climate threat looming large, everybody recognizes that growth of nuclear energy, or for that matter, acceleration of nuclear deployment in India, is not just in India's interest, but in global interest. So, so in this backdrop, the program has been growing. First, the development took a lot of time. Indigenous self-reliant development took time. There were kind of delays because of restrictions. But then the of late, the program has picked up momentum. For example, there is a fleet of 10 700 megawatt PHWRs, which has been approved in one go for construction. And the preliminary work is already on all of them. So that, including the ongoing programs, today India has as many as 15 700 megawatt reactors under construction in the PHWR category. The construction program of VVR reactors, which has been going on, that is in addition to this. And also there is construction of the 500 megawatt fast breeder reactor. And as you know, many of them are in fairly advanced stages of construction. So you may see these reactors coming on stream in rapid succession. Already Kakrapar 3 has been commercially operating, which is the first 700 megawatt unit. Kakrapar 4 has been connected to the grid recently. And so the program is growing, but I agree with you, compared to the needs, it is still a very small program. And it is indeed a big challenge to kind of grow nuclear capacity in India, consistent with the, on one side, India's development aspiration, and on the other side, meeting the net zero target in view of the climate change threats. So compared to that, of course, the program is not as fast as one would like to have, but the program has been growing continuously.
That's a little bit about you just mentioned that balancing two things, India's net zero commitments and its aspiration for growth. Perhaps much more is required. In your opinion, how much more is required? What scale should we aspire to for our new nuclear energy program? That's one. And my other question is, for people who are still afraid a little bit about nuclear energy, we know that a lot of changes have happened in the recent past, in recent decades, which has made this technology safer. Could you walk us through what kind of changes that people should know about so that they're no longer afraid, in a sense, of this energy?
Yeah, so let me respond to the first question first. The see, India currently is still, its per capita energy consumption is way below the global average itself. Forget about comparing with the advanced countries of the world. And we also know that uh, the the per capita energy consumption is a direct measure of the state of development or human development index or quality of life of people and things like that. So there is, of course, a strong aspiration, strong desire uh, in the mind and heart of every Indian that they would like to see India to be among the advanced countries of the world. And Viksit Bharat is something which everybody is talking about. Now, that means if the human development index in India, the average human development index in India, has to be comparable to the advanced countries, so it would mean you must reach something like between 0.9 and 0.95 human development index. Now, that cannot be achieved unless you exceed a minimum threshold of per capita energy use. And that threshold, even after accounting for the fact that going forward there would be energy efficiency and uh, so compared to what per capita energy use was expected earlier, today it may be somewhat lower, even though it will support good quality or high quality of life. But even so, that threshold multiplied by the population of India would give you a number of the order of 28,000 terawatt hours per year. That's the total energy that India must be able to access and use every year. Now, compared to that, today the current use is only at around 6,800 terawatt hours per year. So there is that large gap between the current use of energy and what it would be as a minimum for being a developed country or a Vikasit Bharat. Now the question is from where we get all that energy, and particularly when one is kind of talking about decarbonizing the energy sector, because we have to bring global warming under check. We must reach net zero within a stipulated time. So the energy sources available are essentially renewables, and I'll include large hydro also as a part of renewables, and nuclear. Because in India, the other renewable energy source, for example, geothermal, tidal, wave, they are all very small. So these are now renewables, including large hydel put together, can account for something like 8,000 terawatt hours per year, not more than that. Again, these numbers, I wouldn't argue a few percent here and there or 10% here and there. These are all ballpark numbers. But there is a big gap between what can be delivered by renewable energy, including hydro, and the 28,000 terawatt hours. That, in fact, that gap is that is what renewable energy can deliver and what we need to have 28,000. It is 1 is to 3.5, that kind of a difference. So the remaining 2.5, from where does it come? And the only choice is nuclear. Now, this has posed a big challenge. I'm not too sure that everywhere there is the required awareness about this, but it's growing and this will sink in as we move forward. So, climate change is a must because that's going to be a bigger killer than even nuclear weapons, I would say. Now, so the only other choice is either use nuclear or remain underdeveloped. And the nuclear technology, I come to the second part of your question, today has become much safer than what it was earlier. Even today, that is, for example, if you take the track record of nuclear, even after accounting for Chernobyl and Fukushima and accidents of that kind, if you ask, and this data is available all over in the internet, that what is the fatality per unit use of energy, and then you look at it, compare on that yardstick different energy sources, you will find that fatality per unit of energy delivered is perhaps lowest in nuclear compared to any other source, both renewable as well as the conventional energy. But having said that, nuclear is a very safe energy all along, notwithstanding Chernobyl, Fukushima. But the fact is that one cannot overcome the trauma which the accidents like Chernobyl, Fukushima caused. In fact, Fukushima trauma was more out of tsunami, and all the fatalities were essentially because of tsunami. But the tsunami also damaged the reactor, and so there was this little radiation fallout. And so that got associated with Fukushima, and then the trauma we all associate with Fukushima. Actually, the public trauma in case of Fukushima had nothing to do with nuclear accident. But that's reality. The psyche of all of us as human beings is such that we cannot tolerate or we cannot accept a trauma. The large disaster we cannot accept. There is no point in saying that per unit energy delivered, the risk is so low. But at the same time, one cannot live with a large accident, because that does cause public problem. So it is in that context, nuclear people have been wanting to continuously improve. And one of the directions for the development is to kind of eliminate, or if you cannot eliminate, at least absolutely make it minimum, the possibility of such a trauma being caused, or for that matter, possibility of any adverse impact in public domain. In the sense, if there is an accident in the reactor, it may have effect in the reactor plant and things like that, but there should be no impact in public domain. And there are several systems which have been designed to meet that criteria. And even the existing systems, a lot of safety features have been added to really achieve that kind of performance. So, of course, I think it will not be right to say that there is no risk. There is nothing like zero risk in this world. But I think humanity will soon recognize that the risk is so small, and climate change has actually become an existential threat. So we have to decarbonize and manage the earth with minimum change as a result of global warming. And at the same time, we have to realize our developmental aspirations. And that is, I think, while it is true of India, and India being one of the, in fact, now the biggest country in terms of population, but I think it is also true for a much part of the world. For example, all emerging economic countries, what I'm saying is valid. They all have developmental aspirations. They all have growing economies. So there will be need for energy. They will have the ability to pay for that energy. But now a large part of that has to come out of nuclear. And so now the deployment of nuclear energy so far has been essentially in the developed part of the world, although of late some of the developing countries, they have started deploying. For example, United Arab Republic, UAE has started some new nuclear plants. But by and large, it is restricted. But that has to change. The real large-scale deployment has to be in the developing part of the world, particularly the emerging economic countries. And so I think the challenge which India faces is actually also very similar to the challenge rest of the world faces. And now one has to see, in fact, there is a lot of, since you are interested in global issues, I'm mentioning that, but I think you need to look at new way of looking at nuclear energy and make sure that this kind of phobia, I will call it, of nuclear is sort of put aside. People realize the reality, they come to terms with the reality, and the risk is actually very small. In fact, if you look at Fukushima, there was hardly any radiation damage of any kind, although a lot of people were displeased. Chernobyl, there was some people were exposed. There were some cases of thyroid overexposure, but they were essentially in double-digit number. It's not very large. And we know there have been several accidents in the industrial history of the world where people have lost their life in thousands and larger numbers. So I'm not justifying any accident, but it's a question of coming to terms with the reality and development. And the question is, if the entire world, they have to meet their aspiration of good quality of life consistent with advanced countries, where are the resources? Today, of course, we are talking about not using fossil because of their carbon emission issue, carbon dioxide emission issue. But if everybody has to enjoy that kind of quality of life, where are the resources? The nuclear, you provide very large energy with minimum earth resources because the calorific value is very small. So I think we need to look at it differently, and the world order should take that shape, in my view.
Talk to you a little bit about, in the European Union, which has traditionally been very, reluctant about nuclear power. Countries like Germany, for instance, France used to have a fairly developed nuclear energy system, but there were some hesitations there too. But now, of course, there are voices in France saying that more should be done in that direction. I wonder which way do you think countries like the US, the EU, as a collective, and indeed China are going as far as nuclear energy is concerned?
Well, I think if you take the average trend, certainly that trend, the nuclear is growing worldwide. Now, that doesn't mean that that applies to all countries. And this will continue to be so. Each country will have its own policy, its own way of looking at it. You mentioned Germany, for example. Now, Germany, of course, they have been talking about, uh, they had a phase out policy for a long time. But, uh, in early 2000s and all, Germany had a thinking that no, we should at least delay the phase out for some time and continue operating these units. And then you had Fukushima, and they sort of said that no, we'll still adhere to the phase out policy, and so they implemented phase out. Now, this was actually the final stage of that implementation was driven by Fukushima, which happened in Japan. And Japan, of course, because of the Fukushima accident, they shut down all reactors for a review. They did carry out a review, and progressively they have been bringing the units online after a review. In fact, only a couple of days back, I saw the news that the largest nuclear power plant is also about to be recommissioned in Japan. And not only that, but they have also carried out a review of their energy policy in the long run, and have in fact concluded that nuclear will remain a part of the energy basket. Now, Japan, obviously there is a lot of public sensitivity about nuclear because they have faced the brunt of Fukushima accident, but also earlier the exposure to nuclear weapon explosion came essentially Hiroshima, Nagasaki, which are also, they were in Japan. So the question is, a country which is where they actually face the most severe consequences compared to any other country. There is public sensitivity, but then still they decide to continue with nuclear. And a country like Germany, Germany is sitting in Europe. Their grids are integrated with European grid. If there is a shortage at any point of time, instantaneously power can flow from neighboring countries into Germany, and of course vice versa, because it's a part of the same grid. And good part of that power will be nuclear, because every possibility that power would be flowing in from France to Germany. So Germany can say that, well, I will not generate any nuclear power myself, but in the sense, it doesn't affect their energy security as much as Japan. So Japan is an island country. They are kind of, they don't have that benefit of an integrated grid across their national borders. Now, this is the point that one must recognize. Each country will have to look at different options. I must also add that the cost which Germany has incurred or had to pay for decarbonization is actually astronomical. And I have looked at those numbers, and see, Germany's electricity grid is only around 600 or 650 terawatt hours kind of per year. That is the kind of no, I'm sorry. That's it. Per year, that's what they deliver. Whereas India today, we are using something like between 1300 to 1600 terawatt hours. And as I told you, we need to multiply that by a factor of 3 or 4. So if you just take the cost which Germany has incurred and multiply by the larger size of Indian system, India cannot afford that kind of So on the other hand, you meet all the requirements. You can make sure that you're not emitting carbon dioxide, you're protecting environment by adopting nuclear, and which is quite safe. It is recognized to be safe. And that's the trend being followed by many other countries. There may be another country which may have tremendous renewable energy on their landmass. And if they can meet all their requirements, certainly that country can decide that we'll do everything with renewable. I think it is quite understandable. But the point that we need to really recognize is, all these examples we take, they're all advanced countries. So their per capita energy consumption is already at the saturated level. No doubt they need additional plants, new plants to be added, but that is essentially to kind of replace the plants which have to be retired, they will be phased out. So you bring in new capacity in place of the old capacity which gets retired. That is not the situation in India or the emerging economy. There you are actually increasing the per capita energy consumption. So you have to, of course, replace the old capacity, but there is a much larger component in terms of adding new capacity to increase per. So I think these things are not comparable. That's the point I'm making. But I think given that each country will make its own choices, it will determine its own policies, because after all, we have to respect public opinion. And that, is the central point in my view.
As we conclude, Dr. Kakodkar, could you take us through, because there's a lot of talk about renewables in India too. You mentioned renewables in your last answer. Could you take us through, and you mentioned that, we will never be able to fulfill all our needs just through renewables. We will need nuclear power. Could you give us a cost assessment? If India has to go down this path of building more and more nuclear reactors for its energy needs, what kind of costs would be, needed? And do we have the resources to A, build them, B, maintain them, and C, ensure that they remain safe?
Well, if you look at the cost structure of the pressurized heavy water reactor that we build in India, and we have built so many of them, and their performance has been world class. For example, one unit of Kaiga atomic power station, it won it made a world record at one stage of the longest uninterrupted run. And of course, a very large number of these reactors, and in many occasions, I think that number runs in around 40 times or something like that. They have shown that they have continuously operated for more than 1 year without any interruption. So their capacity factor is very good. But the point to note is the capital cost of these reactors is around less than half of the capital cost of reactors built in advanced countries. Now, so when you hear these stories and comparisons, this is one factor. We make nuclear power in India much cheaper. And so nuclear power in India has always been, all along, cost competitive compared to the alternatives. So earlier we used to make comparison with coal, and if you construct a coal plant and a nuclear plant at around the same time, one can show that nuclear power plant tariff is comparable with that power coming from coal. Now, coming to renewable, comparison with renewable, what really happened was, according to me, this is not fair, but I'll just tell you what has happened. See, renewable energy, particularly the photovoltaic, there is an advantage of factory production of these modules. So an efficient mass manufacture makes the photovoltaic much cheaper. I think to some extent that is also true in case of wind. Now, so the cost of electricity produced at the plant terminals of renewable has been cheaper. In fact, the successive tenders have shown that that is quite cheap. But that is not the tariff which the consumer pays. That is the tariff which is exchanged between the DISCOM and the producer, energy producer. Now remember, this power is not the baseload power. This power is a variable power. Now you can't be operating grids with such variability. Grids have to be maintained stable. Now, in order to make sure, when we know that on the demand side, if there is a variation, there is a daily load curve and a seasonal load curve. Now, because of that, you invest in additional capacity for supplying the peak load to maintain the grid stable. Or you always talk about what is the energy supply or what is the deployed capacity, and then what are the spinning reserves or what is the peak load at a particular. Now, with renewable energy, you are adding also the variability at the supply end. So the total investment in the grid will have to become much larger compared to what it would be otherwise. The second part is renewable energy. You have to have significant storage, because you cannot achieve stability without storage. And the recent tenders, where the tenders have been called as a kind of a grid supply, not at the terminal of the plant, grid supply. And of course, different people would have provided for different kinds of capacity. Some may have provided for 5-hour capacity, 6-hour capacity. Some might have talked about pump storage, or different modes of doing it. But all the bids that have come through like that, they have all gone to 5 rupees, 6 rupees, 7 rupees, some even higher. Now, if you compare to these numbers, nuclear power is actually cheaper. Whereas, if you compare at the terminal and then people say, no, nuclear power is very costly, that's an unfair comparison. Because that's not the money which the consumer pays. Consumer pays one much more, unless he has a decentralized grid. He's living in a standalone, not connected with the grid. That's a different. And then that actually is a good case for renewable energy, because that certainly makes sense. So, don't misunderstand me. I'm not again. I am a champion of renewable energy. I myself, I chaired the Solar Energy Corporation. The first chairman was me. So I champion the renewable energy. But this distorted narrative that goes around, I think has done a lot of damage. And I think slowly people are now feeling that by actual experience. And this will happen worldwide. This is not just India. As the share of renewables in the grid goes up, you will find that you will have to invest more money, and so the corresponding tariff will go up. And there are studies to show that if everything is out of renewable energy, 100%, then that tariff may become 2 times or maybe even 4 times, depending on the situation. So that's what I would say. So I come back to the nuclear energy actually has been cost competitive earlier with coal, and it has been cost competitive in real terms with renewable energy, and it will continue to be so. In fact, as you go forward, you will find it will become, in relative terms, more and more competitive.
There's a fascinating and a very detailed explanation on India's nuclear hopes and why India must consider nuclear energy as one of its pivotal pillars upon which its energy security would stand upon in the years to come. Dr. Kakodkar, thank you very much for your time, really helping us understand where India stands on nuclear energy. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.